The White House is saying President Biden's budget proposal would reduce the deficit by $3 trillion over the next 10 years by once again taxing the mega rich. Joining us right now to break down the president's proposal is Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee. He serves on both the Ways and Means and the Budget Committees. And Congressman, thank you for being here today. Why don't you lay out your views of this budget proposal?
Well, I think it's a good starting point. What we've been saying on the Budget Committee, and we have general agreement, but when it gets to the specifics, it's not so easy to come to agreement. But what we've been saying is we have to address the issue on all fronts, and that includes the revenue side of the question. We can have and will have a robust debate as to what the president's proposals might actually do and whether or not we accept all of that. But I think the most important point is to take on this question knowing that the investments we make have to result in growing the economy. We have to reduce spending where we can. We've come to some agreement on that. I wish we would stick to it. But then we actually have to put revenues on the table. Many of us think that we went too far in 2017 on some of the tax reductions. Lots of Republicans that I've worked with over the years agree with that. So I think the president's budget says everything's on the table. It's obviously Congress's job to take that and turn it into legislation. I'm looking forward to that debate.
Congressman, some of the ways that the president's budget lays out to raise this additional revenue that you point out, I think it's probably questionable whether you can get them all through. And Axios did a very good job this week laying out the real numbers of what the deficits are starting to add up to, what it looks like, what the national debt's going to look like under this. Just points out that even under the budget's own assumptions, that fiscal deficit is going to be $1.78 trillion in 2025. That's 6.1% of GDP. And that's a bigger deficit in terms of the GDP. It's wider than the U.S. ran in any year between 1962 and 2019, with the exception of the 2009 to 2012 aftermath of the financial crisis. Those are big numbers, and Axios points out that if you are not raising taxes on people who make $400,000 or less, it is going to be very difficult to get back to normalized levels.
It is going to be difficult. We're in a difficult spot. So I think what we have to look at is both the tax side of this question to make sure that we are raising the revenue we can where we can and that everybody pays their fair share, but also look at the investment side, look at the spending side. And I think often that's overlooked, that there's spending and then there's spending. The kind of spending we ought to be emphasizing are those aspects of investment that do affect the growth in the economy and reduce dependency on government programs. Just a simple example would be early childhood education. It's often looked at as loss, as money spent that we don't get back. The problem is we're looking at the 10-year budget window when we look at some of these investments, and the return on that investment might be in the 20 or 30-year budget frame. So I get the point, and it's a serious one, but I do think we have to apply a much more thoughtful approach even to the spending side of this question. Investing in housing, for example, increasing home ownership, particularly in marginalized communities, is a transfer of equity that has a long-term benefit in terms of stabilizing a neighborhood, stabilizing a family, creating a nest egg that they can rely upon later on through the construction of equity in their own home. So all spending is not equal, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Okay, on that point, let me give you some of the issues raised by Jody Arrington, who's the Republican House Budget Committee chairman. He has some issues with what's being targeted for spending here. One would be $90 billion that the president has requested to expand access to free community college, even after both the House and the Senate push back plans to broadly forgive student debt. He talked about $11 billion that Biden wants for the Department of the Interior to preserve the stories of cultures and history across America, $3 billion for the State Department to advance gender equity and equality worldwide. I mean, there's some issues that people might take a point with.
I understand that. And look, Jody Arrington's a friend of mine, but I think very often there's a focus on certain aspects of the budget for which there may not be an immediate return, but that it's an important part of a government function to preserve our culture.
$11 billion to preserve stories and cultures of history across America? That seems like a pretty big price tag.
Well, it's certainly not the spending that is going to affect the long-term economic health of the country. I mean, I get the point, and we can have debates over specific pieces of this, but I'm not sure that that is the make or break in the federal budget. It's a reflection of our values. We have to sometimes do some things that don't have that immediate return that we see as culturally important.
Congressman, when you talk about government spending, you do insert the word invest a lot, and I understand that sounds a lot better than spending, but when you look at what we're talking about as a percentage of GDP, and it's not going to come down anytime soon, and it's much higher than it's ever been historically, and that would indicate that it's a spending problem as much as a tax problem. And the more you raise taxes, the harder you make it to grow for the private sector, who really does the investing in this country. Is usually the private sector. So I mean, you're looking at greater than 100% debt and deficit, to the GDP. As far as the eye can see, the only way out is growth. And raising taxes doesn't help growth. It just helps the growth of government, which doesn't help anyone. I mean, what are we going to do? The growth is the only way out, and the private sector is where that comes from.
No, I take the point. I think the question is, what's the sweet spot here? It's my view, and the view of many, that in 2017 we went farther than we should have. But I don't, for example, support simply flipping the switch and going back to the tax code the way it was before the 2017 cuts. People like former Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp, when he was trying to work on this, specifically to the corporate rate, didn't think we should go or could go as far as we did in 2017 without having a negative impact on these long-term fiscal questions. We've got to get back to something that might not please everyone, but is going to find that sweet spot. And on the spending side, I take your point, except that on the domestic discretionary aspect of federal spending, which is where so much of the rhetoric goes, that is not growing at the same rate as other aspects of the federal budget are. But that tends to be the focus when we get into a debate about spending cuts on that aspect of the federal budget that does have a long-term return on the quality of life for Americans and may actually impact growth, often is where we look to cut rather than dealing with the thorniest issues, defense spending, health care costs, the Social Security and Medicare.
Entitlements, but we can't get, you can't get President Biden. In fact, when former President Trump was on the other day, he didn't say that he was going to cut entitlements. He was actually making a point that he was going to try to cut some of the waste. But immediately the Biden administration came out and said, this guy's going to cut your entitlements. We will not on my watch. Never will happen. You can't talk your president into even talking about entitlements, Congressman. We're not even close to getting either side to address that, which is, as you say, that's the elephant in the room, right?
It is the elephant in the room, and we have to be able to take action where we can find agreement. There are ways to cut our overall costs without reducing benefits. I think it's one of the fallacies.
You sound like Trump. That's what Trump said.
No, I've had a lot of things said about me. I don't know if I can accept that one.
Well, you're not tan enough. You need to go to a booth or something.
Right.